would be honored if you would join us.
Greetings and welcome to another Film Stories YouTube episode with me, Dan Cooper. And this week we are going to bookend an episode from a couple of weeks ago when we looked at the road that Warner Brothers took to reimagining the Batman franchise following the critical and commercial failure of Batman and Robin in 1997. So, Batman Begins would successfully relaunch the franchise in 2005, but that period of 8 years in between was really a time of careful consideration and, to some degree, open-minded thinking. Warner Brothers were well aware of the value of Batman as a commercial entity, unlike, say, 20 years before when they'd sold off the rights to Superman, arguably an even more valuable piece of intellectual property, for just $4 million in 1973. That equates to about $22 million in today's money, still a paltry sum to sell off a character like Superman for 25 years. Of course, back in 1973, nobody knew that the value of franchises would be so large, forget superheroes especially. But after Tim Burton's staggering success with 1989's Batman, Warners were determined to play very carefully with The Dark Knight and to protect the character's future earning potential. And so they did. As we explored just a couple of episodes ago, and I'll put that episode on the end screen in case you haven't seen it and want to skip ahead and find it. So as we explored then, Warner spent 8 years, a considerable amount of time, especially by today's standards, exploring their options. And not surprisingly, when they finally did give the green light, it came very, very, very quickly, actually. Christopher Nolan was coming off the back of an indie hit by the name of Memento, followed by Insomnia, a mid-sized studio movie where he'd proved that he could work with schedules and stars and budget. And by all accounts, his pitch for Batman Begins lasted all of 15 minutes. And so convinced by the completeness of his vision for the Batman franchise with Warner Brothers that they pretty much just went with him straight away. You can, of course, having seen the films, I'm sure, take a pretty good stab at what that pitch sounded like. The Dark Knight Trilogy, as it would come to be known, was prized for being the most realistic take on capes and cowls in cinema history, and that idea, inspired by Richard Donner's 1978 Superman, another film we've covered previously here on the YouTube channel, that idea would run throughout the trilogy's plot, through its mise en scène, if you'll forgive me dropping a posh French phrase in there, who says this channel isn't high culture with more than a little élan, and through the film's aesthetic as well. In fact, on all levels, really, of the film's production, it just promoted that sense of reality, of truth. Nolan worked with David Goyer on the script for the film, meeting him at a local diner to hash out story details. Nolan contacted Goyer originally as he wanted a comic book bod on the project. Goyer initially turned down the opportunities. He was due to direct Blade Trinity in a fairly short time span. But eventually, though, due to him being a huge Batman fan, the allure was just too much, and he signed on to work on the story and pen the first draft. And then we move on to casting. If you haven't seen the screen tests for Batman Begins, they're here on YouTube, and if I can, they'll be playing right now. So both Cillian Murphy and Christian Bale were considered for the part of Bruce Wayne and Batman. And it's interesting going back and watching those screen tests now. I mean, for one, hopefully you get to see them as I'm talking about them, but they're very cinematic, which is in no way surprising, given that we're talking about a project led by Christopher Nolan, perhaps cinema's strongest advocate at the moment for preserving and improving the visual fidelity of film. Now, as such, these screen tests look great. Amy Adams pops up in one as well, as she was clearly in the running for the role of Rachel Dawes, which of course eventually went to Katie Holmes. Gary Oldman, who would play the role of the hero cop, Jim Gordon, was originally slated for the role of Ra's al Ghul, but that went to Liam Neeson. It was ultimately Bale who would go on to wear the mantle of the Bat, and Nolan has, in the years hence, said that it was one of the more controversial aspects, certainly one of the most parodied elements of Bale's Batman, that was actually the deciding factor, and I am talking, of course, here about the Bat voice.
Gotham needs you.
And you serve Gotham?
I serve justice. It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me. Trouble?
Nothing I can't handle.
He knows who was at the docks.
He won't talk.
He'll talk to me. Who was with Falcone at the docks?
I don't know, I swear to God.
Swear to me.
That throaty growl that came to define Bale's Batman. By the way, if you're not rasping "where's the trigger" out loud right now, then you need to ask yourself how invested in this episode you really are. Bale's Bat voice would go on to be the source of much debate by fans, and whilst it's fair to say that maybe at times it did get a little bit out of control, for Nolan, it was that clear separation of the Bruce Wayne and the Batman characters through the use of that voice that drew the director to Bale's take on the character. And if you watch the screen test, you can see Nolan's point as well, where when Murphy, who is a tremendous actor, adopts a more conventional Batman husky voice, similar to that of Kevin Conroy's seminal take on the character, for Nolan, and for me, I think as well, I'm convinced, I'm a believer, it just doesn't work as well as Bale's rasping delivery.
Who was with Falcone at the docks?
Bale would need to bulk up for the role too. He just made The Machinist, a great film, where he played a character with an eating disorder and it dropped down to around 50 kgs, and he essentially doubled his body weight in 6 weeks to be able to bulk up and fit the bat suit. In fact, bulked up by too much, by some accounts. In fact, Bale said that when he finished his ice cream and pizza program to gain the necessary bulk after playing the emaciated Trevor Resnick in The Machinist, and as an aside, ice cream and pizza diet, if that's what it takes to become Batman, then I think I'm more than qualified. And Bale said that ultimately he actually ended up gaining too much weight, bulked up too far, and the whole suit was a bit too snug. So as such, he ended up having to shed weight to play the role, something that he hadn't imagined when he was much lighter. Now, you can't talk about Batman Begins and the process of making that film without talking about Nolan's use of practical effects either. Batman Begins, for me, marks an interesting point in Nolan's career regarding his attitude to CGI. Now, before the film's release, in an interview with Empire, he said that for a film of this size, we probably have the record for the fewest CG shots. And of course, Nolan has gone on to become one of cinema's most die-hard proponents of in-camera effects. But Batman Begins does use a fair amount of overt CGI, and I say overt because I'm talking about CGI that's designed to be seen, not the sort that's designed to be invisible, such as wire removal. The shot of Gotham as Bruce returns following his extended absence, for example, as well as the addition of the monorail, Wayne Tower to the Chicago cityscape. They were all visible additions, as well as the use of digital doubles for Batman in a few scenes. Now, Nolan was really reluctant to use VFX at the beginning of the process of Batman Begins, even insisting that FX houses like Double Negative, who worked on the film, proved to him that they could put their digital work through the same photochemical processes that physical film undergoes to capture that same sense of reality. But ultimately, as he went through the process, he would be persuaded, and he was pleased enough with the results, that he would include the aforementioned CGI elements. And this wasn't at the expense of practical effects either. I mean, you could do an episode alone on the practical effects of the Dark Knight films, including Batman Begins. The crew built 6 tumblers for the car sequences, and they also built an entire block or 2 of Gotham and a section of the Narrows, which is another neighbourhood in Gotham, at Cardington in Bedfordshire, which is an aircraft hangar. They couldn't find a soundstage big enough to use, so they converted it an aircraft hangar for the sake of physical production. So CGI certainly wasn't used to replace physical productions in Batman Begins. However, I said interesting because, for me at least, the CGI work on Batman was clearly held to the highest standards of believability by Nolan. But he would go on to veer away from such use in the later Batman films, and indeed all of his later films. When you go back and look at Begins now, Nolan's use of CGI in the film, despite the work that went into making it seamless, it does stand out. Not only within the film itself, but in the wider body of his work, where he seems to have just really made his use of CGI as invisible as possible. So I always think Begins is an interesting place to go and look back at Nolan in that part of his career, experimenting with more overt CGI. Nolan also shot parts of the film in IMAX too, and that would prove to be a huge boon for the format, as Nolan's fondness for IMAX would help to popularise it with both audiences and other filmmakers. And whilst the film upon release did well financially and did well critically, earning $373 million worldwide, it sold fewer tickets than almost all the other Batman films that preceded it, and it didn't hit the box office numbers of Burton's 1989 film, despite inflation. But it wouldn't really be finances that secured Batman Begins' legacy. However, it would go on to be known for its solid storytelling, for its innovative use of structure, for its characterization, and for that sense of verite, that sense of realness that Nolan was so intent on creating. And it would really serve as a solid cornerstone for the two films that followed. Of course, 2008's The Dark Knight would be hailed as an instant classic, and the film really holds an important place in the genre's history for providing the foundation for the two films that followed, and really for a changing style for the genre, following Nolan's veer into verisimilitude and reality-based superhero films. The film would also, of course, be synonymous with and become a blueprint of sorts for the idea of the reboot. It was a film that took a franchise which had failed, a franchise which was seen as damaged, and it rebuilt it. It rebuilt fan trust. It rebuilt consumer interest in an IP which was seen as having difficulties, to put it mildly. And it's since 2005, and since Batman Begins' release, we've seen the idea of the reboot become a popular one with studios. And really, in essence, what they're trying to do is replicate the framework that Batman Begins put into place, because it would go on, of course, to create a multi-billion-dollar franchise from the Batman intellectual property, which was seen at that point as being something in the doldrums. So, a big well done to all involved. It's a film that I love returning to here and there, and I hope you enjoyed this film story. Please do like and subscribe. It really does help us. We are a small outfit, and every little bit of exposure really does help. And do be sure to click on the link below and check out the website where you can find details on our latest print edition of Film Stories. That's right, we are a print magazine. Please do go and have a look. Buy an issue. Love it. I'm sure you will. And do come back here next week, where I'll be back with another film story. Bye-bye.